Hello friends and welcome. Today we're going to focus on 11 eyeshadow palettes that I tried in 2022 which are gorgeous and which I think can work extraordinarily well for those of us who are over 50. These 11 palettes are a mix of neutral palettes, all matte palettes, palettes with matte shimmers and metallics, colorful palettes that are all mattes, and colorful palettes with metallics and shimmers. And the prices of these palettes range from ridiculously inexpensive drugstore options to mid-level to high-end. So there are options for all of us. And all of these palettes have two things in common. First, the formulas are exceptional, which means that these eyeshadows are very easy to apply and very easy to blend, which are two very important qualities for those of us with mature eyes. And second, the color stories are wonderful. After we run through these palettes, I'll be creating two looks using two of these palettes. For the first look, I'll use the least expensive palette, and for the second look, I'll use the most expensive palette. If you're new to this channel, welcome. As a teacher in one of my previous lives, I loved to share information. And now, as a makeup artist who specializes in helping those of us who are 50 plus look our best, I still love to share information. But now that information is in the form of makeup tips, makeup techniques, and product information for makeup and beauty items that work for us now. And we also explore fashion and wellness tips from time to time on this channel as well. So if this focus sounds like a fit for you, I do hope you'll join our really wonderful family of subscribers before you leave today. I often like to start out with something fun, humorous, or positive. So since we often look back on only the negative things that happened in the past year, I thought we should start off today with three very positive things that happened in 2022. First, a spacecraft developed by NASA and other partners deflected the path of an asteroid, which proved that we no longer have to fear that asteroids might destroy our planet. Second, hair follicles were grown for the first time in a lab, so there's now new hope for treating hair loss. And third, spinal implants helped paralyzed people walk again when nerve stimulation devices were implanted in their spines. These are three things we can definitely feel good about from 2022. Now, let's dive into today's topic. I'm going to start with a category of eyeshadow palettes that have neutral color stories, and I'll go from least expensive palette to most expensive palette. Several years ago, e.l.f. launched a brilliant concept that they call their bite-sized eyeshadow palettes, which cost only $3. I tried several of them when they first came out and really liked them, although the quality did vary a bit from palette to palette. But this year, I tried a newer entry into this particular makeup line, their 4-pan all-matte I Love You a Latte palette, which is wonderful. As you just saw, this little palette has light to deep neutral tone creams, beiges, and browns, which can work for all of us. And the quality is really quite exceptional. In fact, I often turn to this palette when I'm in a hurry and I want a quick, foolproof, but polished eye look. And you definitely can't beat the $3 price tag. Next up is a 12-pan palette from Wet n Wild, which is called Nude Awakening, which sells for $5.99 on the Wet n Wild website. Once again, it has light to dark neutrals, but in this palette, there's a nice variety of cool, warm, and neutral tones. It has 5 mattes, 1 satin, and 4 shimmers. And both the mattes and the shimmers range from light to dark colors, which really makes it a more versatile palette. Wet n Wild makes 7 other 10-pan palettes in a variety of color stories, as well as 4 quad palettes, which are also excellent. Next up is my most recently purchased palette. It's ColourPop's Gone Matte palette. It's an all-matte palette with 30 shades and sells for $35 on the ColourPop website. Now, since mattes form the basis of most of our eyeshadow looks, it is really wonderful to have these 30 different shades, which can be used to start any eyeshadow look. And this palette does what I think every good eyeshadow palette should do. It contains colors that run the full gamut from very light to to mid-tone to deep to very dark. But what I love most about this palette is how beautifully it's organized, which makes it an absolute cinch to create a perfectly pulled together eyeshadow look quickly and easily. Each vertical row goes from the lightest shade in that color family to a much deeper shade with 3 shades and a gradient of tones in between. It's really a brilliant layout. And if we're in a hurry or just want to pull together a look without having to give a lot of thought to color choices, this is really the perfect palette. And as you can see, the colors range from the warmest tones on the far left to more neutral colors in the middle to cool tones on the 2 far right vertical columns. So you can find colors like the gray eyeshadows in the far right-hand column that you really don't often find in other all-matte palettes. These shadows will create a perfect base for just about any eyeshadow look. The last palette in the neutral palette category has mostly neutral shades with a few pops of color tossed in. It's one of the 2 most recent Natasha Denona 15-pan mini palettes, which is called her My Dream palette, and it costs $69. There are 11 of these midi 15-pan palettes in her makeup line, and this palette came out of her desire to create the eyeshadows that would be in her own personal dream palette. One of the things that many of us love about Natasha Denona palettes is the variety of textures, and this palette is absolutely no exception. There are 6 mattes, there are 2 cream to powder formulas, 1 multi-chrome, 2 metallics, 2 sparkling duochromes, 1 high shine foiled metallic, and 1 satin shade. And this palette, along with the small Natasha Denona My Dream Collection Companion Blush and Highlight palette, were my to me, from me holiday and birthday gifts this year. Now let's move into the second category of palettes that are more colorful. And I'll again go in order of least expensive to most expensive. The first palette is from ColourPop. It's their 12-pan In the Springs palette, which sells for $18. It has 8 mattes, 3 metallics, and 1 gold with silver pinpoints, and definitely gives off wonderful summer vibes. And believe it or not, it is possible to create some very wearable looks with this palette because some of the oranges and blues can be used as soft accent colors. There are 4 very light to dark blues and 5 mid-tone to deep oranges. And since blue and orange are complementary colors, they really work beautifully together. And if you combine them in an eyeshadow look, they can really make the eyes pop. Just looking at this palette really makes me want to dive into it once again. And I definitely will this summer. Now, I probably shouldn't be counting this next entry as a palette, since it's actually a group of single eyeshadows, but since I've put them together into a magnetic palette and they are top-notch quality eyeshadows, I'm going to go ahead and bend my rules just a little bit. These are single matte shadows that I purchased from the independent company Sydney Grace during their 2 big yearly 2022 sales. One was their Christmas and July sale, and the other was their more recent Black Friday sale. I've put blues, greens, and browns in one magnetic palette, and I put oranges, yellow, white, black, and grays in a different magnetic palette. And as you can see, I have some room to expand in this palette. These single eyeshadows normally sell for $5.25, but during their sales, I believe they were 30% off, if I'm remembering correctly. So Sydney Grace sales are a wonderful time to stock up on their really outstanding eyeshadow singles, as well as their wonderful palettes. Sydney Grace is a small independent makeup brand started by 2 sisters in California. They create and produce all of their own eyeshadows, which is really rare in the beauty industry. I've done an entire video on Sydney Grace eyeshadows, which I'll link in the description box below, so you can access it in case you're interested. And you can access the description box by clicking on the word more. And in the description box, you'll also find links to all of the palettes that I'm talking about today, as well as a link to all of my favorite makeup products. If you enjoy colorful matte eyeshadows, this next palette might be a must-have for your eyeshadow palette collection. It's a palette created by makeup artist Maggie Jones, and the quality of these mattes is really outstanding. It's the Blends palette from the small independent company called Blend Bunny, and the price tag on this palette is $39. At the bottom of the palette, it says 30 matte pigments for the perfect blend. And that is exactly what these eyeshadows are meant to do. Blend into each other perfectly and also blend into other mattes perfectly. And just as with the ColourPop Gone Matte palette, these colors are organized beautifully since each horizontal row features light to dark shades. And there's both a black and a white in this palette, so any of these shades can be made lighter or darker by mixing them with the white or the black. In spite of the fact that these colors are very pigmented, this palette is very easy to use because the colors blend out easily and reliably. So the most important thing to know about using this palette is to pick up a very small amount of color on your brush and then to tap the color off before applying it. This palette really should be a staple in the eyeshadow collection of anyone who absolutely enjoys colorful eyeshadow. The fourth palette in this category is from another independent makeup brand called Glam Light, and it's their second palette collaboration with a 24-year-old TikTok social media star by the name of Michaela. It's the Glam Light Michaela Part 2 collection, and this palette has to win the award for most beautiful packaging of any of today's palettes. This is a 30-pan palette which sells for $42. Most of the top two rows are shimmers or metallics, and then there are 14 mattes, including a black. Just as with the Blend Bunny palette that I talked about earlier, the colors in this palette are set up in horizontal rows of color stories which go from lighter to darker shades. It's a gorgeous palette which really performs exceptionally well. The final two palettes are high-end palettes. The first is the annual holiday palette created by makeup artist Pat McGrath. Pat is a British makeup artist of Jamaican heritage who was inspired by her mother, who was a dressmaker, and her mother's love of fashion and makeup. This 2022 palette has 18 shades, and although it originally sold for $82, it's currently on sale at Sephora, at least as of the date I'm filming this video, for $62, which is still a very hefty price tag, but certainly a good discount. Unfortunately, you can see that there was a bit of an accident with one of the colors at the very top. I was very fortunate to receive this palette as a gift, and I absolutely adore it because it's the first Pat McGrath holiday palette to include some stunning, colorful mattes. Last year's palette was mostly shimmers with only 4 neutral mattes out of the 18 shades in the palette. This palette has 9 mattes and only 2 are neutral shades. There's a stunning deep blue, a gorgeous green, and 1 mid-tone and 1 deeper purple shade as well. And I also love the fact that there's a very light shimmery violet in this palette, which you don't often see. This palette is definitely a very welcome departure from some of her previous holiday palettes. And the quality of these eyeshadows is absolutely amazing. Also truly amazing is this last palette, which is from makeup artist Natasha Denona. It's her 28-pan Metropolis palette, which is one of her higher-priced $129 palettes. This palette was both my Christmas and my birthday present this year. It actually launched in September of 2019 and I fell in love with it, but I just couldn't justify the price. And when I finally decided to purchase it last year, it was no longer available on the Natasha Denona website. I was really disappointed that when I finally wanted to purchase it as my Christmas and birthday gift, it was gone. Fortunately, it was brought back several months ago, and I was bound and determined not to miss out on it this time. This palette was inspired by the post-industrial New York of the 1920s and 1930s, so much of the color story is a nod to paintings and posters from the Art Deco and Great Gatsby era. It's an incredibly well-curated palette with a balance between cool and warm shades, as well as some pops of color and a wide variety of textures and depth. And the way the color story is laid out is especially brilliant because no matter where you look at the quads of color in this palette, or whether you look horizontally, vertically, or even diagonally, you will definitely find colors that work together. So the layout has been very carefully designed. There are 10 creamy mattes, 3 mattes, 1 duochrome, 2 high shimmers, and 12 metallics. I haven't even used this palette yet since I didn't want to try it out until we could look at it together. So I am really excited to dip into it today for the very first time. As I mentioned earlier, I'm going to create one eye look today using my least expensive palette, which is my I Love You a Latte palette from the e.l.f. Cosmetics. And on the other eye, I'm going to create a look using my most expensive palette, which is my Natasha Denona Metropolis palette. I'll start off with the I Love You a Latte palette. I'm going to put the lightest color on my lid and then combine the two middle colors for my transition color in my crease, and then the deepest color on the outer part of my crease and my lid. I'm using a denser flat brush to apply the light color right across my entire lid area. I'm also going to apply it right under the arch of my eyebrow. And then I'm using my Sigma E25 brush to use those mid-tone colors right in my crease and slightly going above my crease as well. Now, if I'm in a hurry and just running out the door, I could just leave my look right at this point. And then I'm going to go up toward my brow with any leftover product from my brush. And then I'm going to blend out the edges with a fluffy brush which has no eyeshadow on it. And now I'm taking the deepest dark brown color and putting it on the outer part of my lids and crease. And then I'm using the brush that I used to apply the lightest color to go over all the edges, so I make sure I have no harsh lines whatsoever. And there you have it, quick and easy. And then just for the fun of it, I'm going to take a light shimmer color from the Wet n Wild palette and put it on the center of my lid. And I'll actually carry it toward the inner corner too. And I think you can see that the shimmer color brings more light to the lid because it attracts light, and that helps my eyes look a little bit bigger. Now let's dive into the Natasha Denona palette. I'm going to start off by using the shade called Rope as my transition color in my crease area. And again, I'm going to bring my brush, when I have just a little bit left on the brush, up toward my brow. It has a little bit more warmth to it than the colors from the e.l.f. Cosmetics I Love You a Latte palette. Oh, these blend in so beautifully. And then I'm going to take the shade called Chrism and put just a tiny bit of that also in the crease. This will add even more warmth to this area. I could not wait to dig into this palette. It is so gorgeous. And it's so versatile with all the different color combinations. I guess I've come to realize that my favorite palettes are ones where I can get a lot of different looks. And that's probably because I'm a Capricorn and I'm pretty darn practical. Now I'm going to take this blue-green color called Royal and put it on the outer part of my crease and lid. I absolutely love the blues and the blue-greens in this palette. And since they're highly pigmented, I am only putting just a very small amount on my brush. This is a gorgeous color. Oh, and I almost went over and started putting it on the other eye, just out of force of habit. And then again, I'm going to blend thoroughly. And you can see how incredibly easily these shades blend. I'm going to go in with just a tiny bit more of that Chrism since I lost a little bit in that process of blending. Now I'm going to take this shade called Jubilee and put it on the outer part of my lid. It looks like a metallic to me. So I'm first going to apply it with a dense brush. And it applies fairly well, but I know I'm going to get better payoff if I use my finger. And just blend this in a bit. Now I'm taking this lightest color called Queen, and I'm going to apply it on the middle and inner part of my lid. Again, going back to my fingers to get a little bit more color payoff. And then going back to that deeper matte color and using it to get a little bit more depth on the outer part of my eye. And then I'm taking Queen, and that's a little bit more metallic than I wanted to have under my eyebrow. But I do want to make the inner part of the lid a little bit lighter. All right, I need to add some eyeliner and mascara and do a little bit with my under eye when I get back, and I will see you shortly. So let's take a final look at the two looks. First, the I Love You a Latte e.l.f. Cosmetics palette, where I used 4 different shades of beiges and browns. And now the Natasha Denona Metropolis palette. I hope you enjoyed today's foray into these 11 really outstanding eyeshadow palettes. And in the comments section below, I hope you'll share your favorite eyeshadow palettes that you used this past year. I look forward to being with you next Thursday, but until then, I wish you good health and happiness and hope you have a fabulous rest of your day. Take care.